Hello, BookTube. I am currently reading The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikabue, and this is the Dennis Washburn translation published by Norton. And I'm about, as you can see, I'm about 400 pages into this novel. And if you're not aware of what this novel is, it's uh, considered the first ever novel ever written because it was published in medieval Japan around the period of 1000 ish AD, and so this is considered one of the classic of Japanese literature. It's put on a pedestal on parallel to, for example, like our Western tradition of like Homer or whatever. So you got those references in Homer, those how they cast a shadow in our literature. Tale of Genji is the same for Japan, and it's had a number of English translations, but this is my first time ever reading it, and I want to give you a taste about what the atmosphere of this novel is like, because I went into this novel not knowing what to really expect, other than two things, other than one, that it was plotless, and two, that the main character Genji was not always a likable figure in his treatment of other people, or at least mostly women. Um, I found that I've quite enjoyed this novel, and I'm only 400 pages in. I'm not even halfway in, so maybe that's premature to say. But I love the atmosphere, and I wanted to give you a taste about what this novel is like. And so I'm going to read about a page and a half, almost 2 pages maybe, and just read a certain scene uh, of Genji associating with another woman, and how they talk to one another, and also how the narrator talks to one another, and then just kind of break down a little bit about what goes on in this scene, and how it reflects on the reading of a novel as a whole, because I quite enjoy it, but I know that this is not for everyone, and I want to give just a bit of a taste on, like, if what I read now doesn't interest you, then probably the rest of the novel is not going to, because so far it's 400 pages of this, but I imagine that it just continues on for the rest of the novel. So I'm going to start reading, and then I'll break down after. It would have been improper to keep Genji waiting on the veranda, and so he was shown into the outer chamber on the south side of the princess's quarters. The lady in waiting, who served as her intermediary, spoke with him, and in turn conveyed his messages to Asagio. I'm going to be butchering these Japanese names, by the way. And Asagio is a woman that has been in Genji's past before as one of his many affairs, and he's now meeting her after some time when he has matured and she has matured. Sitting before your blinds like this makes me feel like a youth again, he said, revealing his dissatisfaction at being kept outside. Having remained devoted to you through all these years, you served the deities at Como, I was hoping to be granted permission to at least sit inside your curtains. Those years I served as priestess, she replied, all seemed like a dream to me. Having awakened from that dream, it now seems so fleeting that I feel confused and find it difficult to decide what to do. Please give me time to consider your years of devotion calmly before granting you your permission to enter. Genji was reminded again how truly ephemeral the world was. And then he launches into a short verse, which is 3 lines and does not rhyme because it's translated. But this is the verse that he composes in response. In secrecy I suffered cruel neglect, waiting so many years for the gods you served, to bestow their blessings and let me see you. And then he launches into prose again. What taboo will you invoke now, I wonder, as your excuse to turn me away? From after suffering all manner of afflictions in this world, my sorrows have accumulated. I would like to share with you some small portion of them. He spoke with intensity. His interest in her was more refined than in the past, and he himself was older and more mature. Nonetheless, his amorous inclinations still seemed inappropriate to a man of his status, And so she replied with a verse, another 3-line verse. It goes like this: "The gods would censor me for breaking vows I swore to them, were I merely to ask about the worldly sorrows you suffered." Genji responded with irresistible charm. "Ah, your rejection is painful. After all, the sins I committed while you were serving as priestess have all been swept away by sacred winds." The intermediary replied somewhat flippantly by saying, "And how, my lord, have the gods judged your purifications?" And here there's a footnote, because the intermediary's reply references a piece of poetry in Japanese literary history, and Dennis Washburn gives us the little piece of poetry at the very bottom of the page. "Alas, the gods do not accept the offerings I made at the purification stream, and will not answer my prayer to be cleansed of my love for you." And then we go back to the narrative. Asagio was genuinely mortified when she heard this. She was by nature reticent, and thus not used to courtly manners and the ways of love. With the passing years, she had become increasingly introverted and withdrawn, and her attendants looked on in dismay at her inability to banter with his lordship. Genji sighed deeply and then stood up. "Apparently you think I have come here out of amorous motives. The older I get, the more indignities I have to endure. You have treated me with such unprecedented aloofness that people will surely say that my devotion to you has been all for naught." He departed, and the typical gushing praise followed in his wake. The late autumn sky was a delight, and as the leaves rustled in the trees, Princess Asagio conjured in her mind touching moments from their past, an occasion here, an occasion there, and some charming, some sadly moving. And she recalled with deep feeling the kindness and gentle character that he had shown her. Genji had left in an irritable mood. His mind was so preoccupied that he couldn't go to sleep. He had the lattice shutters raised early in the morning and stared out at the mist-shrouded garden. There, among the withered plants, vines of bellflower were twining along on the ground, the open faces of their blooms peeking out modestly. He had an attendant pick up some unusually dazzling hue and send them of unusually dazzling hue and send them to Princess Asagio. "Your brisk treatment of me," he wrote, "made me feel awkward. I resent how you must have watched me with mocking eyes as I slouched away in retreat. Even so," and then he launches into another short verse, "can the unforgettable bellflower I glimpsed once, its face open to the dew, now be passed to the glory of its full bloom." And then he goes into prose again. "I assume you would at least take pity on me for all the years I pined in vain for you, yet how cold you are." The mature stylishness of his letter, pregnant with meaning, demanded a reply. "Otherwise," her woman insisted as they brought in her inkstone, "it might make him think that you have no sense of propriety." She launches into a short verse in reply, and this is what it says. "As autumn fades, bellflowers climb, the whittle fence obscured by mist, meekly showing their withered hues." And then she goes into a little bit of prose. "You fittingly compare me to my namesake, for like the bellflower, I am drenched in dew." She wrote nothing more, and her letter had little in the way of charm or appeal. So why did he keep staring at it, and find it hard to put aside? Apparently he was enchanted by the soft color of her fluid brushstrokes on the bluish-gray paper. When it came to recording exchanges of this sort, I tried to take account of both the rank and style of writing of the people involved. Even so, try as I may to convey the words exactly as I heard them, including those that were perfectly innocent at the time, people sometimes wonder if things really happened the way in which I depict them, and their doubts make me aware that while I have written this tale with an air of confidence, there may be many places where my account is suspect. And I'm going to end there with my reading of this section. And there's a lot to unpack there, a lot that goes on that I think conveys a lot of the flavor of Genji, at least in this translation that I'm currently reading. um, a lot of this novel is very episodic like that, where it's uh, Genji just going about his life and doing things and visiting people, chatting with people, things that happen at court. He rises in status, he ages, and this novel just captures it all. And in this sense, you're luxuriating in this atmosphere. So you're not approaching it so much for the plot. You're approaching it for the the little snippets like this that you get that convey so much in so little, and I quite appreciate that. And I wanted to start back at the beginning of the quote, where Genji was visiting the princess, and he is speaking. He's brought to a certain chamber to wait on her, and he has to speak to her through an intermediary. So that's part of how conversations happen in this novel. Most of the time, when conversations are happening, unless they're both male to male or female to female, they're happening between a parting of some kind, whether it's some kind of curtain or it's some kind of blind or whatever it is. And usually they don't actually see each other a lot because there's a sense of propriety among distance, and depending on how close you are to the subject, you have to speak through an intermediary. And for the princess, she's got all these ladies in waiting, these attendants, who are usually of high rank as well, but not as high rank as she is, and who attend to her. And they are the ones usually who will convey messages, or the ones that will convey, speak through to a lover. So there's not always that direct contact. And you even get this in certain aspects of Genji's affairs, when he will actually have an affair with women where he's actually physically intimate with them, but he will not actually have seen their face because it's happening in the dark, in secret, usually. And it's only after this affair has been started that he and conversations through intermediaries have happened, that he actually and sometimes is rash enough, which the narrator points out, and which other people in the novel point out, where he takes bold moves to actually part the curtains and see who he's talking to. So that's what you get with that first part, where he's waiting for this lady, and he has to speak through an intermediary. And this lady, and then you also get the fact that she had been a priestess. So I don't quite fully understand the priestess part yet, but from what I understand, from what I get so far, 400 pages into this novel, is that women of high rank would ascend to the status of a priest, or as a priestess, through certain there's many different religious positions, through like almost like not so much status of birth, like this princess, her mother was not the previous priestess of this specific shrine, but it's more based on her own status. She's raised to this certain rank of status where it's considered proper for her to take the position as the priestess of the shrine. And of course, you see, it doesn't last forever, and it's not based on death. It's more based on political regimes or certain regimes, because the reason why she'd been the priestess at Kamo, which is a shrine, and when at the point in this novel, the emperor is this young man, and he had only been recently brought into position as emperor. That means her position changed, and someone else takes her place as priestess, and she moves into retirement, and she can. But as a priestess, you're not supposed to have, amorous relations. So during that whole time, she never got to see Genji, despite their starting an affair previous to her ascending to that line of priestess. But now she's back home, and she's retired as a priestess. And this is Genji's first meeting with her since she had retired from that position. And she's very cold to him, and very confused, and in this scene, as you see with her reaction and with some of the narrator's quips, he's being quite forward with her. He wants to resume his relations, and earlier in the chapter, it says how I'll actually read it out to you here. It was Genji's nature never to waver in his devotion to a woman once he had developed feelings for her. And so he sent frequent messages of concern and condolence to the bereaved princess. She, however, had not forgotten all the complications his attentions had caused her, and as a result, her replies to him were anything but encouraging, an attitude he found most frustrating. And then we move on to after they have the initial responses of him wanting to be closer with her, and her responding with how her period of being priestess was like a dream. He talks about how ephemeral the world was and how the world changes, meaning she's not treating him with the care that she probably once had, and she is completely changed as a person. But little does he know, or at least he does acknowledge, but maybe not in this case when he's being so forward with her, that he himself has changed. And Genji does that a lot as he ages and he experiences suffering and loss, and also with changes in political fortune. He likes to contemplate on the change in the world, and how change is so constant, and you can never guarantee that a current state of happiness will always stay the way it once is. And so now that he's meeting with this woman for the first time in so long, he's again brought to attention of the state of change in the world. And then we move into the poem, where he says, "In secrecy I suffered cruel neglect, waiting so many years for the gods you served to bestow their blessings and let me see you." And that's another common theme in this world. Genji, but not just Genji, express their feelings of anger, pain, dissatisfaction, happiness, delight, through different little poems like this. It's not on every page, but it's very constant. It's a constant thing in the courts of Japan in this time. And it's also a reflection of their rank, because the better poems that you compose, the more grasp you have at your skill of poetry, it reflects a lot on your own education and your own ability to delight other people. And this is especially seen in the early scenes of this book, or of this novel, when it comes to forms of attracting mates. So Genji, he's basically this young pretty boy in the beginning, and he's perfect at every skill of the arts. And he delights people with his poetry, with his calligraphy, with his painting, with his dancing and his singing and his playing of instruments. And so he's always perfect here, but when it comes to him judging other women, he often judges them based on their own calligraphy, on their own writing of their letters, and of the quality of their verse. And if he thinks that their verse is lacking in status, it'll actually make him less inclined to be with that woman. And it's usually a form of, that's why part of a woman's education was poetry, in the form of trying to be elegant and refined in how they respond to the affections of men. And then he moves on here to where it says he spoke of intensity, and his amorous inclination still seemed inappropriate to a man of his status. Early on, usually he gets away with quite a lot of this, but now as an older man, where he's matured, and he's actually, he's praised earlier on, or as he matured, that he was less inclined to be amorous and to pursue these kinds of affairs. But now all of a sudden, he's being a lot more rash, and this is pointed out as something that's seen as inappropriate to a man of his status, but it's also a man of his age. So Genji, in this point is probably around 30 at this point in the novel, and that's considered a man who's gotten up there in age already at this point, because Genji, we start off with Genji being an 18-year-old. That's at least when the main focus of the narrative focuses on Genji, and he's experienced a lot in the period of time between Genji as a young man to where Genji is now. And moving on to the next page, where he's rejected by the lover. It says that where the ladies were in dismay at her inability to banter with her lordship. This is common too with some of the women, where once they're out of the limelight of the court, which is like this huge focal center of status and of luxury, really, displayed in the novel. The more withdrawn you are, the more you are out of the ways of the courtly ways, and the more old-fashioned you seem that you are. And because she had been a priestess, and now she's retired out in this building outside of the court, out of the courtly sphere, she does not have the skills of bantery that Genji so much excels at, and so much so that her attendants are even embarrassed by her responses. And we see that the attendants really do play a large part in not only how affairs work, as acting as intermediaries between them, but also in how their subjects are portrayed according to how they inspire the mistresses. So, for example, there's a particular woman in here where she's so introverted that she barely ever replies to Genji, at least at first. And Genji is being respectful to her status by not just leaving her to the wind and completely ignoring her over this. But her attendants are so embarrassed that sometimes they even respond in her favor, because they just can't stand how their mistress's inclinations not to respond. And anyways, and then further on in the scene, once he leaves her, then we get this section of like a panoramic little scene of nature, where it talks about let's see, I guess before I get to that, it talks about how the princess is feeling and how Genji is feeling when they leave. So they have this encounter. Genji is saying, apparently you think I came out of here out of amorous motives, and the older I get, the more indignities I have to endure. And he just leaves. And after they leave, the narrator composes 2 paragraphs, one for the feelings of the princess and one for Genji. And the princess, she's touched by the moments of their past, and she recalls the good and the bad of their affair beforehand, and she recalled the deep feeling, the kindness and gentle character that he had shown her. So despite her being cold, she's still affected and feels a lot for Genji. But Genji himself, he's irritated and he can't go to sleep. He's unhappy with how this encounter went. And Genji, and often with Genji, it leads to what I was saying before about the scenery. So I want to get into the scenery, where it talks about the plants and the vines and the bellflowers specifically. And he's contemplating the scenery, the period of the day and the period of the season. So he notices the bellflower, which is the term he uses, and that is often used for this lady, this princess, the lady of the bellflower. And he picks one, has a attendant pick one for her, and then he sends off a letter. And a lot of the beauty of this book is not just through the interpersonal details, but it's also through the scenery, the panoramic, scenic lines that are composed. And I really quite I find them quite interesting because it's not the narrator so much who's picking these out. It's the characters themselves that notice this, and it's because the characters notice this, and because they're moved by these beautiful scenes that um, that really drive a lot of some of the emotions that are portrayed in this novel. And this one is only a small one, him noticing the bellflowers, but there's many scenes of noticing the trees, the blossoms on the trees, and noticing uh, the mountains or the coastal line or the period of morning and how the morning reflects the nature around them, or how maybe the bad weather reflects uh, the current state that they're in. There's a very particular scene where it seems like Genji and his attendants feel like they're going to die because the seas nearby are uh, being thrown onto the shore through this enormous storm with lightning and thunder. And that's like this pivotal moment in Genji's life where he thanks the gods for them having survived that. But even then, there's moments where they through these pieces of scenery they compose verses in delight, and they usually take the scenery as depictions of their inner turmoil or their inner happiness. And then he writes her a letter, and he writes her a letter in response to this visit. Usually it's customary after you visit like this to send a letter, and the letter usually includes a verse. And so he responds with a verse, and then she responds in reply. And this is the second last thing I want to talk about, is the sending of letters, because letters are very important, because they not just convey messages through their words and through the verse that you get, but it's also the style. And like I said before, where Genji he's very well done and very accomplished. Uh, Calligraphy is an important conveyor of meaning, and so I'm going to read that reply here. The mature stylishness of his letter, pregnant with meaning, demanded a reply. So it's not just what's said in the letter and what's written in the letter; it's how the letter is written, and constantly we get that too, where Genji is a pro at calligraphy, or at writing out the words and the way he writes them out conveys meaning. So he can change that. And it's also with the women who reply; they convey unspoken meaning through the way, like whether if it's rushed or dashed off, or if it's hurried, or if they're the thickness of the lines, because if they're writing Japanese characters, the calligraphy is a lot more time consuming and a lot more meticulous than say our writing, and so then their calligraphy really does matter in how they convey messages. And then she replies, but notice how the response considered of the narrator to her own letter. So his was very mature, stylish, pregnant with meaning, and demanded a reply. Hers, she wrote nothing more, and her letter has little in the way of charm or appeal. So noticing how her letter writing is vastly insignificant compared to his, and how that conveys meaning about her as a character at this point in her life. She's out of the way, she's out of touch, and she's a bit rusty with her writing of amorous letters. But we get a piece of Genji's own feeling where he says, but then why did he keep staring at it and find it hard to put aside? Apparently he was enchanted by the soft color of her fluid brushstrokes on the bluish-gray paper. And a mention of the paper is important too, because the quality of the paper also conveys stateliness and appropriateness to whatever the letter is. So, for example, in periods of mourning, they will not only put on robes of gray, but they'll also be sending their letters in appropriate style colors of paper, because in this time, coloring of paper is a status of wealth, and there's usually scent attached to it as well. So scent, like a perfume, and then the color of the paper, the calligraphy. There's so much packed in here that's not always said explicitly, but you can convey the meaning from it. And then that very last paragraph before I end, that last paragraph where the narrator actually takes a rare introspective look at her own narrative, which does not actually happen so much that I've found. Uh, the but the where she actually says, when it comes to recording exchanges of this sort, I try to take account uh, of both rank and style of writing of the people involved. Even so, try as I may to convey the words exactly as I heard them, including those that were perfectly innocent at the time. People sometimes wonder if things really happen the way in which I depict them, and their doubts make me aware that while I have written this tale with an air of confidence, there may be many places where my count is suspect. And that's where you get the elusiveness of the writer as well, because on one hand she's recording a tale, and she gets into the thoughts and the feelings of the writer or of the characters involved. Yet on other circumstances, Murasaki Shikabu places herself in as a witness to these events, and she also makes judgments too, based off of what she will and will not include. For example, even I think earlier in this chapter, or at least earlier on in the narrative that I just read, she makes a pointed note where Genji is talking with the Emperor, and the Emperor is wanting to promote him in rank, but he takes he objects to this, and he also objects to some other things that the Emperor has been proposing. Keep in mind at this point that the Emperor is an illegitimate child of Genji himself, but this is a deep secret that only Genji, the woman that he had the affair with, and now actually know about this. But the narrator makes her own commentary on this. Genji laid out numerous precedents in making his case to His Majesty. However, since I am a woman, would it not be impudent of me to record in detail their discussions of state affairs? Would it not? You see what she does there? The narrator of the Tale of Genji identifies herself as a woman, but also says that it would be against herself as a woman, like her status as a woman, to record affairs of the state, which implies that the state politics and the drama of court politics usually is not the domain of a woman to tell, and that reflects a lot of this reading so far, where you don't get a lot of the politics, only in so much as the politics reflects or impinges upon the actual story that Murasaki Shikabu wants to tell, which is the feelings of not only Genji, but of the women that Genji is associated with, which is the main thrust of the narrative so far. Anyways, that's what I want to talk about so far in my reading of the Tale of Genji. I'm only 400 pages in. I would like to do a full video on this once I'm finished it, but that will be quite a while from now, because despite how happy I am with how this novel is going, it's an oversized paperback and with small print, and I'm a slow reader, so that's going to take me quite a bit to get through. Hopefully by the end of this month I'll be finished with the Tale of Genji. So I reached over 33 minutes. Good lord. That'll be it for now. And if you liked what I read and what I talked about, then you will like the Tale of Genji, I think. But if you find a lot of that kind of stuff boring, and you don't like the plotlessness of novels where they just kind of move in and out, and the beauties within the circumstances that are described, then maybe this isn't the book for you, especially since there's so much of it. I mean, literally, there's so much of it. I even experienced a little bit of Genji fatigue on the weekend when I was reading a chunk of the novel, but even then, the plot is so interwoven and skillfully done that I'm still very much enjoying this book. But that'll be it for now, and see you next time, Book 2.